I still remember the smell of that morning. Burnt copper, ozone. The cleaning drones had been over the assembly deck twice already, but the smell never really left. It was baked into the metal. 40,000 cadets had walked across that floor over the years, and the deck remembered every single one of them. My name is Tavik. I'm Velshai. If you've never met one of my kind, picture something tall and thin, gray-skinned, with eyes too big for the face. We're a careful people, cautious. We measure a room before we step into it. My mother used to say we were born already worried, and she wasn't wrong. I'm telling you this story because somebody has to. Most of the cadets who were there that day are gone now, scattered across 100 systems. A few are dead, and the official record, well, the official record is a polite little lie. It says an incident occurred during the orientation cycle. That's all. 3 words doing the work of a war. I was there, I saw the whole thing. So let me tell you what really happened the day the Deathworld girl threw one punch and broke something that had been standing for 900 years. The Academy. Let me set the scene, because you have to understand where we were. Velmora Stellar Command Academy, the biggest of its kind in the Concord. It floated in high orbit above a gas giant called HFY, this enormous ring of white metal and blue glass, slowly turning, always turning. From the outside it looked peaceful, like a piece of jewelry somebody had left hanging in space. Inside, it was the most competitive place in the known galaxy. You didn't apply to Velmora, you were selected. Every member species of the Concord sent their best. The Sol, with their 4 arms and their cold logic. The Brithik, who looked like walking stone and weighed about as much. The Unai, who could see in the dark and barely needed to sleep. Hundreds of species, all stacked together in one rotating ring, all fighting for the same thing, a place in the officer corps. And then there were us, the careful ones, the Velshai. We weren't strong, we weren't fast, but we tested well, and the Concord liked how we thought, so they kept letting us in. The thing you need to know about Velmora is the ranking. Everything was ranked. Your scores, your fitness trials, your simulations, your sparring, all of it fed into a single number that hung over your head like a second name. They posted the rankings on the great wall in the assembly deck, a wall 4 stories high, glowing softly, every cadet standing right there for the whole academy to see. At the top of that wall for 3 straight years had been one name. Corvale Drennan. He was Brithik, stone-born, 2.5 meters of gray muscle and plated skin. His arms were thicker than my whole body. He could lift a maintenance drone over his head and throw it the length of a corridor, and he had once just to make a point. He'd never lost a sparring match. Not one. Not in 3 years. Everyone was afraid of him. Even the instructors handled him carefully. He had this way of looking at you, slow, like he was deciding whether you were worth the energy of remembering. I'd had him look at me exactly once in my first week. I didn't sleep that night. Kor was the king of Velmora. That's just how it was. The wall said so. And then they brought in the humans. The new ARRIVLS. It was the talk of the whole academy for weeks before they even showed up. Humans from a death world. I should explain that term because in the Concord it means something specific. A death world is a planet that should not, by any reasonable measure, support intelligent life, crushing gravity, lethal weather, an atmosphere that's basically slow poison to most species, predators at every level of the food chain. The kind of place a survey ship marks with a red flag and never visits again. Earth was a death world. The humans were from Earth. The Concord had only made contact with them a few cycles before. Most species, when you find them, they're grateful to join. They've been alone, they're scared, they want protection. The humans weren't like that. They'd already been out in the dark on their own, fighting things, surviving. They didn't act rescued. They acted like they'd been waiting for us to show up so they'd have someone new to argue with. There were stories, always stories. That a human had survived a hull breach by holding their breath. That a human had walked back to base on a broken leg through a sandstorm that would have flayed us all down to the bone. That humans ate things, living things, with teeth and claws and called it a meal. I didn't believe most of it. You hear a lot of nonsense at an academy. Cadets like to scare each other. It's a way of feeling brave without taking the risk. But I'll admit my hearts were beating fast the morning they arrived. We were all assembled on the deck, 40,000 of us in our rows in our species blocks. The great ranking wall glowed behind the dais, and the doors at the far end opened, and a small group of figures walked in. There were only 6 of them. 6, after all that talk. 6 humans in plain gray uniforms walking across that enormous deck like they owned it. They were smaller than I expected, smaller than the Brithik anyway, shorter than the Sol. Just these compact, dense little bodies, moving with a strange, easy rhythm. And one of them was a girl. She walked at the back, not hiding just at the back like she didn't care where she was in the line. Dark hair cut short, a scar across one eyebrow pale against her skin. She wasn't big. If you put her next to Core, she'd have come up to maybe his chest. But she walked wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Every other cadet on that deck walked like they were aware of the gravity, aware of the weight of being watched. She walked like the floor was a courtesy she was extending to it. Loose, heavy in the shoulders, light on the feet, like a thing that was used to a much harder world and found ours a little boring. Her name, we'd learned, was Rena Cole. The first day. Here's something they don't tell you about Deathworld species. It's not just that they're strong, it's that they don't know they're strong. They grew up on a planet that was trying to kill them every single day, so what we'd call extraordinary, they call Tuesday. They've never had to think about it. The strength is just background noise to them. The first sign of trouble came on day 2. We were in the gravity gym. Velmora can adjust local gravity in any training room, and the standard for fitness trials was 1.4, a little heavier than most homeworlds, to build the cadets up. The humans walked into a 1.4 room and you could see them relax. Their shoulders dropped. One of them, a big quiet man named Os, actually laughed. Earth, it turned out, sat right around one of their own standard. And their bodies were built for it, with margin to spare, built for falling, for fighting, for running down prey across open ground for hours. Built to endure. So when the instructors cranked the gym up to 2 to challenge the Deathworlders, expecting them to struggle, they jogged. I was standing by the wall. I watched Rena Cole do a full lap of the gym at 2 gravity, the kind of load that would have pinned a Velshai to the floor, and she did it talking, chatting with Osai, not even out of breath. At the end, she looked up at the gravity readout, a little confused, and asked the instructor if the machine was broken. The instructor didn't answer. He just turned the gravity off and dismissed the session early. I think that was the first crack. The first moment the Academy realized it had let something in that it didn't understand. The other cadets noticed too. You could feel the mood change. The humans had been a curiosity. Now they were a problem, especially for the species near the top of the wall, because the wall was a finite thing, and every new strong cadet meant somebody slid down. And nobody slid down quietly at Velmora. Kornots. Corvale Drennan did not like the humans. I don't think it was hatred, exactly. I think it was something simpler and uglier. He'd spent 3 years building himself into the most feared thing on that ring. The whole place arranged itself around him. And now there were these small, soft-looking creatures walking around like the gravity was a joke, and people were starting to look at them the way they used to look only at him. He couldn't have that. The first thing he did was test them, quietly at first. He started arranging to be in the same training blocks. He'd accidentally clip a human's shoulder in the corridor, and a clip from Core could knock us all off their feet. The humans would stumble, catch themselves, and just keep walking, like a tree had bumped into them. No reaction, no fear. That bothered him more than a fight would have. I watched him do it to Osai once. Full shoulder check, the kind that had broken collarbones before. Osai rocked back half a step, looked at Kor, looked him up and down slowly, and then smiled. Not a friendly smile, a patient one. The smile of someone who's been hit by much worse and is choosing not to do anything about it yet. Then Osei walked on. Kor stood there in the corridor for a long moment, and I swear, for the first time in 3 years, the king of Velmora looked unsure. He needed a target, someone he could break in front of everyone to put things back the way they were supposed to be, and he picked the one he thought was weakest. He picked Rena Cole, the girl from the Deathworld. I'd started watching her by then. Everyone had a little, but I was a Velshai, careful, observant, so I watched more closely than most. She wasn't loud, that surprised me. With all the stories I'd expected the humans to be aggressive, chest-beating the way the Brithik were. They weren't. Rena especially. She was quiet. She read a lot actual physical books, paper, which nobody had seen in centuries. She kept to her small group of 6. She was polite to instructors in a flat, even way that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite anything else. But there was something underneath it. I sat near her in a theory class once. Combat doctrine. The instructor was going through a famous conquered battle, a defensive action where a vastly outnumbered force had held a position for 6 days before falling. The instructor presented it as a tragedy, a noble defeat. Rena raised her hand, asked why they surrendered on the 6th day. The instructor said they'd run out of ammunition. Rena asked why that meant they had to stop. The instructor didn't understand the question. He explained patiently that without weapons you cannot fight. And Rena just looked at him. This long, quiet, genuinely confused look, like he'd said something that didn't fit together in her head. Like the idea of running out of ways to fight was a foreign concept to her, something that simply did not exist where she came from. She didn't say anything else, but I remember thinking in that moment that there was a whole world behind that girl's eyes that none of us could see, a world that had taught her something we'd never been taught. That you don't stop, ever, until the thing in front of you stops first. I think that was the moment I started being afraid for Kor, instead of afraid of him. The provocation. Kor's first real move came in the mess hall. The mess hall at Velmora was huge, terraced, thousands of cadets eating at once under a great curved window that looked down on the gas giant. It was loud. It was where the social order of the academy lived and breathed. Where you sat, who you sat with, who looked at you, all of it mattered. The humans always sat together at a low table near the window, off to the side, not because they were excluded exactly, but because nobody had quite worked out how to approach them. Kor walked over to their table one evening with 3 of his Brithik followers, stoneborn like him, big and slow and mean. He stood over Rena where she was sitting, reading her book, and he knocked the food tray off the table with one swipe of his arm. It clattered across the floor. The whole section went quiet. I was maybe 20 meters away. I stopped breathing. Rena looked at the food on the floor, then she looked up at Kor. She didn't stand. She didn't shout. She just looked at him for a second, the way you'd look at whether you decided to walk through. Then she bent down, picked up her book, not the tray, the book, checked that it wasn't damaged, set it back on the table and went back to reading. She ignored him. That was worse than fighting. Kor's whole power was the fear he made people feel, and she just looked at the most feared cadet in 900 years and decided he wasn't worth standing up for. The other cadets saw it. You could feel the wave of it move through the hall, a kind of silent, scandalized awe. Kor saw it too, and it broke something in him. He grabbed her by the back of the collar and hauled her up out of her seat. Now when a Brithik grabs you, that's it. That grip can crush bone. I've seen Kor pick up a fully grown Saul by the throat. So when his hand closed on Rena's collar and pulled, every single person in that hall expected the same thing. We expected her to come up off the bench like a doll, helpless, caught. She came up easy, sure. He had the leverage. But the moment her feet were under her again, she did something nobody expected. She didn't pull away. She turned into it. She turned to face him, slow and calm, and she reached up and very deliberately took his wrist, the wrist of the hand holding her in her own hand. Just held it. Two of her fingers couldn't even close around it. His wrist was that thick. And she said, quiet enough that only the nearest tables heard it, in that flat, even human way, "You should let go now." The whole hall held its breath. The first warning. Kor laughed. Of course he did. What else would he do? This small, soft creature, half his size, telling him to let go. He laughed and his followers laughed, and he tightened his grip and lifted, meaning to dangle her in the air in front of everyone. The final humiliation. Put the Deathworlder in her place. Except she didn't lift. I want you to really understand this. Kor was the strongest cadet at Velmora. He could overhead press a quarter-ton drone, and he pulled up on Rena Cole with that arm, with everything he had. And she didn't move. She stayed exactly where she was, both feet on the floor, holding his wrist, looking up at him with that same flat patience. His arm shook with the effort. Her arm didn't move at all. It was like watching someone try to lift a building by its doorknob. The laughter died. I have replayed this moment 1,000 times, the look on Kor's face, the slow, horrible understanding crawling across it. He pulled again, harder, his whole massive body straining, and she just stood there, a statue, an immovable thing in a small human shape, and the silence in that hall was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Rena let it go on for one more second, long enough for everyone to see, long enough that there was no mistaking what was happening. Then she peeled his fingers off her collar, peeled them, one at a time, like opening a stuck container, and set his hand down at his side. Gently, almost kindly. "There," she said, "sit down before you hurt yourself." And she sat back down and picked up her book. I thought it was over. I thought, in my naive, careful Velshai way, that Kor would walk away, that the humiliation would be enough, that nobody, not even him, would push it further after that. I was wrong. Pride is the one thing stronger than fear, and Kor had nothing left to protect but his pride. He hit her. The strike. It was a real punch, not a shove, not a warning. A full Brithik strike, the kind that ends fights and sometimes lives, thrown down at the back of a seated, unsuspecting girl's head. Half the hall screamed. I'll be honest, I closed my eyes. I'm not proud of it. I couldn't watch. I'd seen what those fists did to training dummies, to armored plates. I knew what was about to happen to that small, dark-haired head, and I couldn't look. There was a sound. It wasn't the sound I expected. It wasn't soft. It wasn't a body breaking. It was sharp and flat and final, like two pieces of metal slammed together, and then a strange high yelp that I'd never heard from a Brithik before. I opened my eyes. Rena was standing. She must have moved at the last instant, turned, risen, caught it. Her hand was up, and Kor's enormous fist was caught inside it. She'd caught the punch that broke armor. She'd caught it barehanded without even looking, because she was facing slightly away from him, her eyes on something across the room, her arm just thrown up behind her like she was swatting an insect she'd heard coming. And the yelp had come from Kor, because something in his hand had broken. Caught against the wall of her grip, all that force with nowhere to go, it had folded back on itself. He was on one knee now, his ruined hand clutched to his chest, and he was making a sound I'd never thought I'd hear from him. A small, animal, frightened sound. Rena finally turned to look at him. She didn't look angry. That was the worst part. She looked tired, disappointed almost. The way you'd look at a child who'd been told 3 times not to touch the fire and touched it anyway. She let go of his broken fist. She said, "I told you to sit down." And then, and this is the part that changed everything, the part the official record turns into 3 little words, she helped him up. She reached down and took his good arm and pulled him to his feet, steadying him. This Brithik twice her size, like he weighed nothing, and she walked him over to the medical station herself, one hand on his back, while 4,000 cadets watched in total silence. She didn't gloat. She didn't say a word to the crowd. She just got the person she'd hurt to where he needed to be, because that was the next thing that needed doing. And somehow the kindness of it, the casual, unstoppable competence of it, was more terrifying than any beating could have been. The king of Velmora had been broken with one hand, and then carried to safety by the thing that broke him. Nothing was ever the same after that. The night after, I didn't sleep. None of us did, I think. The whole ring buzzed all night. You could feel it through the walls. 40,000 cadets, 100 species, all whispering the same thing in 100 languages. Did you see? Did you see what she did? Did you see? The rankings on the Great Wall hadn't changed yet. The system updated on a cycle, and the cycle hadn't turned, so Kor's name still sat at the top, glowing. But everyone knew it was a dead name now. A name on a wall that didn't mean anything anymore. The thing it stood for had broken in the mess hall, and we'd all watched it break. I lay in my bunk and I thought about Rena Cole's face when she looked at Kor on the floor. That tired, disappointed look. And I thought about what it must take to make a person look at violence that way. Not with fear, not with excitement, with weariness, like it was a chore she'd done too many times. What kind of world makes a child like that? I'd find out. We all would. Because the story doesn't end with Kor's broken hand. That was just the beginning. Kor had powerful friends, and powerful friends have powerful pride, and the Academy was about to learn that there are forces in the galaxy that don't bend to rank or fear or the way things have always been. There was going to be a reckoning, and the small dark-haired girl who read paper books by the window was going to be standing right in the center of it. But that's the rest of the story, and I'll tell you the rest in just a moment. So where was I? The broken hand, the mess hall, the night nobody slept. I told you Kor had powerful friends. I need to explain what that meant because at a place like Velmora, the fight you see in the open is never the real fight. The real fight happens above your head, in rooms you'll never be allowed into, between people whose names you only hear in whispers. Kor Vale Drennan wasn't just a strong cadet. He was a Drennan. His clan held 3 seats on the Concord's military council. His uncle was a fleet admiral. His mother had personally endowed 2 of the training wings on the ring we were standing in. When a Drennan walked the corridors of Velmora, he wasn't just a cadet. He was a piece of the institution itself, walking around in stone-born skin. And a piece of the institution had just been broken in front of 4,000 witnesses by a 6-week-old Deathworlder who wasn't even ranked yet. You don't let that stand. Not if you're the kind of clan that thinks of an academy as a thing it owns. The official line the next morning was that there would be a disciplinary review. That sounded fair. It wasn't. The review. Here's the thing about a disciplinary review at Velmora. It was supposed to look at the facts. What actually happened? Who started it? There were 1,000 witnesses and 100 recording feeds, and every single one of them told the same story. Kor knocked her tray off the table. Kor grabbed her. Kor threw the first punch at the back of her head while she was sitting down. By every law of the Academy, Rena Cole had done nothing wrong. She defended herself. She then carried her attacker to medical with her own hands. The review found her guilty anyway. The charge was excessive force resulting in permanent injury to a fellow cadet. They said her response had been disproportionate. They said she should have submitted to the grab and reported it through proper channels. They said a cadet of her, and they actually used this word, background, should exercise greater restraint around more fragile species. More fragile, the Brithik, the species that broke bones for fun, more fragile. I was in the gallery for the ruling. I watched Rena take it. She stood there in front of the review board, 3 senior instructors and a clan adjutant who'd been flown in specifically, and she listened to them tell her that catching a punch was a crime, and her face never moved. Not anger, not even surprise, just that flat, even, patient stillness, like she was waiting for the actual point to arrive. When they finished, they asked if she had anything to say. She said one thing. She said, "If you wanted me to let him hit me, you should have told me before. We don't do that where I'm from." And she sat down. The punishment was a ranking penalty and a flag on her record. But everyone in that gallery understood what the ruling really was. It was a message, to her and to all 6 humans and to every cadet watching. The message was, you do not matter more than the way things have always been. We will bend the truth before we bend the order. The humans understood the message perfectly. That was their mistake, the boards, I mean. They thought the humans would be cowed. They thought a flag on a record meant something to a species that had crawled out of a planet trying to murder them. They thought punishment was a language the Deathworlders would understand. It wasn't. Rena Cole had been punished by worse things than a council adjutant her whole life. Storms, predators, vacuum, a planet. You can't threaten someone with consequences when they've already met the worst consequence there is and walked it to medical with one hand on its back. The squeeze. After the review, the academy started squeezing. It was quiet at first. The humans' training schedules got reorganized, so the 6 of them were split up across different blocks, never together. Rena got assigned to the hardest combat instructors, the ones with reputations for washing cadets out. Her gravity trials got cranked higher than regulation. Her simulations got loaded with impossible scenarios, outnumbered, outgunned, no support, no exit. The kind of no-win tests they used to break the proud ones. She passed all of them. That was the thing they couldn't get their heads around. They kept handing her death. In every form they could dress it up as a training exercise, and she kept handing it back finished. They put her in a sealed combat sim against 6 Sol cadets at once, 4 arms each, cold and fast and merciless, and told her it was a test of tactical humility. She was supposed to lose. She was supposed to learn her place by losing. I watched the feed of that one with half the ring. She won in under 2 minutes. Not by brutality, she barely hurt them. She just took them apart one joint at a time, controlled them, put them on the floor, and held them there. When it was over, she helped them up, the same way she'd helped Core, and asked if they were okay. The Sol, who feel almost nothing, came out of that sim shaken. One of them later refused to spar against any human ever again. Wouldn't say why. The harder they pushed, the bigger she got in everyone's eyes. And the rankings, the great glowing wall in the assembly deck, started to do something it had never done before. It started to move fast. Rena's number climbed, despite the penalty, despite the flags, despite the rigged trials meant to sink her. The cold math of her results dragged her up the wall, cadet by cadet, name by name. The system was old and stubborn and honest in a way the council wasn't. It only knew how to count, and the numbers said she was the best thing that had walked onto that ring in 900 years. The board panicked, because the wall was the one thing they couldn't lie about in front of everyone. The wall was the Academy's whole religion, and it was about to put a flagged, punished Deathworlder's name at the very top. So they decided to settle it the old way. They decided to make her fight. The exhibition. They called it the Founders' Exhibition. It was a real tradition, technically, a ceremonial combat held once a generation, the top-ranked cadet against a champion of the Corps. Usually a graduated officer, a war hero, someone decorated. It was supposed to be an honor, a showcase. The Academy putting its best young blood up against proven greatness in the great central arena, broadcast across the whole Concord. They hadn't held one in 40 years. They dusted it off specifically for her. And the champion they chose wasn't an old war hero. It was a galactic marshal named Vale Serac. I need you to understand who that was. Serac was Brithic like Core, but where Core was a cadet, Serac was a legend. 300 years old, a veteran of the Outer Reach campaigns. He'd personally held a breach against a pirate boarding action with nothing but a broken support beam and lived, and the story was true, there was footage. He was the deadliest hand-to-hand fighter the Conquered had produced in a century. He didn't lose. He had never in 300 years lost. That was the point. They weren't holding an exhibition. They were arranging an execution. They were going to put the Deathworld girl in a ring with a living legend in front of the entire galaxy and let him do what the review board couldn't. Break her. Publicly. Permanently. Put the order back the way it was supposed to be and make it look like ceremony. And the cruel genius of it was that Rena couldn't refuse. As top-ranked cadet, she was required to accept the exhibition. To refuse was to forfeit her place, her rank, everything she'd climbed past their rigged trials to earn. They'd built a trap where the only way out was through a galactic marshal's fists. I remember the night they announced it. The 6 humans were sitting at their low table by the window. Word came down on the public feed, and I watched their faces. They weren't afraid. Osai laughed that big quiet laugh of his. One of the others, a small wiry woman named Petra, actually grinned. They looked at Rena, and Rena just shrugged, this small human shrug, and went back to her book. Later I worked up the courage to ask Osai why they weren't worried. We'd never really spoken. He looked at me with those strange, small human eyes, and he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Tavik, where we come from, the big things are always the most dangerous. The bear, the shark, the storm. You learn young, the bigger it is, the more it wants to kill you, and the more you'd better be ready." He smiled. "Your people, when you meet something that's never lost, you get scared. Our people, when we meet something that's never lost," he leaned in, "we get curious." The arena. The day of the exhibition, every cadet on the ring was in the arena. 40,000 of us packed into the great central bowl under the open dome that looked out at the stars. The feed lights everywhere. The whole Conquered watching, billions of them on 100 worlds. The council in the high boxes. Clan Drennan front and center, Core among them, his hands still in a brace, his face hungry. And down on the arena floor, 2 figures. Vale Serac looked like a mountain that had decided to wear armor. 300 years old, and he hadn't softened a day. He stood in the center of the ring, perfectly still, radiating the kind of calm that only comes from never once in your life having met something you couldn't beat. When he moved, even just to roll his shoulders, you could feel 40,000 cadets flinch. And across from him, Rena Cole, small, dark-haired, in her plain gray uniform, that scar over her eyebrow, standing the way she always stood, loose, heavy in the shoulders, light on her feet, like the floor was a courtesy. She looked next to him, like she should not have been allowed in the same room. The announcer ran through the ceremony, the rules first to yield or fall, the history, the honor of the Corps. Serac inclined his head to the council boxes, the picture of dignity, a legend graciously agreeing to put down a child. Rena didn't bow to anyone. She just looked across the ring at Serac, head tilted slightly, studying him. The way she'd studied Core that day in the mess hall, the way you'd study weather. The signal sounded. And here's the thing nobody expected. Nobody. She didn't attack, and she didn't run. She walked toward him. Calm, unhurried, hands loose at her sides, straight up the middle of the ring toward the deadliest fighter in the galaxy, like she was walking up to greet an old friend. Serac waited, patient as stone. He'd let 1,000 opponents come to him. It never ended well for them. He let her get close, close enough. And then he moved, and 300 years of war moved with him. A strike so fast and so hard that the air cracked. A blow that had ended pirates and beasts and better cadets than any of us. She wasn't there. I don't fully understand what I saw even now. She didn't dodge the way you'd think. She didn't leap. She just wasn't where the fist went. A small shift, a turn of the hips, animal and instant, the reflex of something that grew up where being half a second slow meant being eaten. The fist went through empty air, and the legend was, for one impossible heartbeat, off balance. And in that heartbeat, she stepped inside his reach. One punch. I have watched the footage more times than I can count. 40,000 people in that arena, and I'd swear not one of us breathed. She stepped inside the marshal's guard, into the place where all that size and reach meant nothing, and she set her feet, both feet, planted, the Deathworlder's grip on the ground, and she turned her whole body into a single rising strike up from the floor, through her legs, her hips, her shoulder, into one small human fist. And she hit Veil Serac once. Once, just below the chest plate, where the armor met the body. The sound was the same sound from the mess hall, but bigger, sharper, final. A flat crack that rolled around the bowl and came back. I felt it in my chest from 100 meters up. The marshal of 300 years lifted off the floor. I want to be clear about that because nobody believes it the first time. A Brithik, a creature of stone and plate, heavier than anything that small should be able to move. She hit him once and he came off the ground, all of him, and went backward through the air and came down on the arena floor with a crash that made the lights shudder. And then he didn't get up. He wasn't dead. She'd known where to hit. She always knew. He was just done. Stunned, the breath and the fight driven clean out of him, lying on his back in the center of the ring he'd never once been knocked down in. 300 years of undefeated, suddenly just a number that didn't mean anything anymore. The arena was silent. 40,000 cadets, billions on the feed, total ringing silence. And Rena Cole stood over the fallen legend, and she shook out her hand once like it had stung a little, and then she did the thing. The same thing. The thing that was the whole point of her, that I don't think any of the people who built that trap had ever understood. She knelt down beside him. She checked he was breathing. She got an arm under his shoulders, this 300-year-old mountain of a man, and she lifted him up into a sitting position, gentle, careful, and she stayed there with her hand on his back until the medical team reached the floor. She didn't look at the council. She didn't look at the Drennans. She didn't raise her arms or shout or claim anything. She'd won the most important fight in the history of the Academy, and she behaved exactly the way she'd behaved over a knocked-over food tray. Like winning wasn't the point. Like the only thing that had ever mattered to her was making sure the person she'd had to hurt was okay. And that, finally, was when the arena broke open. The sound of everything Chanjanji. It started with one cadet, an Unai somewhere up in the high tiers, a single sound, sharp and wild. Then another, then 100, then all of us. 40,000 cadets, 100 species, every one of us who'd ever been ranked and measured and made afraid, every one of us who'd watched the board lie and the trials get rigged, and the order grind down anyone who didn't fit, all of us at once, made the loudest sound I have ever heard in my life. It wasn't cheering, exactly. It was bigger than that. It was the sound of something that had been held down for 900 years finally letting go. The council tried to stop it. You could see them in the boxes, on their feet, signaling for order. It didn't matter. There is no order loud enough to shout down 40,000 people who have just watched the truth win in front of them. Down in the front, Clan Drennan didn't move. Kor sat with his braced hand in his lap and stared at the girl in the center of the ring, and I'll never know what was in his head. But I watched him a long time, and at the very end, just before the medics blocked my view, I think I saw him nod. Just once. Small. The smallest possible thing. A king conceding, finally, to something larger than himself. They couldn't take her ranking after that. They tried. There were closed sessions, appeals, attempts to disqualify the result on some technicality. None of it held. You cannot tell 40,000 witnesses and a watching galaxy that they didn't see what they saw. The wall updated on its next cycle, honest and stubborn as ever, and it put her name where the numbers said it belonged. Top of the wall, top of the Academy, Rena Cole. And then she did the last thing. The thing that I think actually changed Velmora forever, more than the punch did. She had her name taken off. She went to the registry and she requested that the public ranking be discontinued. Not just for her, for everyone. She made the case in front of the council, in that flat, even human way, and her case was simple. She said the wall taught cadets that their worth was a number, and that being afraid of the people above you was normal, and that the way things had always been was the way they had to stay. She said that was a good way to make soldiers who break. She said where she came from, you didn't survive by being above the person next to you. You survived by being beside them. And somehow, maybe because the whole galaxy had just watched what the old way produced, and what she produced, they listened. They took the wall down. 900 years and they took it down. The great glowing 4-story wall that had ruled every cadet's life, gone, replaced with something that just listed the graduating classes by name. No numbers, no order, no king at the top. Just names, side by side. After I graduated 2 years later. I'm an officer now, a logistics commander, careful and gray-skinned and worried-born, exactly what a Velche is supposed to be. I never threw a punch in my life that mattered, but I served, and I served well, and I think I served better because of what I watched on that arena floor. The humans are everywhere now. You've probably served with one or under one. They're still like that, quiet, dense, curious about the big dangerous things, impossible to threaten with consequences. They still help up the people they have to hurt. I've seen it a dozen times since. It's not weakness. I understand that now. It's the opposite. It's the thing you can only afford to do when you are absolutely certain you will win, and they are always somehow certain. I saw Rena once more, years later, a docking station out past the Reach. She was a full officer by then, older, the scar faded a little. She didn't remember me. Why would she? I was one gray face in 40,000. But I introduced myself, and I told her I'd been there that day in the arena, and I asked her something I'd wanted to ask for years. I asked her if she'd been afraid, walking towards Serac, just for a second. She thought about it, really thought, and then she shook her head and she said something I've carried with me ever since. She said, Tavik, I grew up somewhere that wanted me dead every single day. The trees, the water, the air, all of it. You learned something growing up like that. She looked out the viewport at the stars. You learn that the world being bigger than you doesn't mean it gets to win. It just means you have to be the kind of thing that doesn't quit. That's all strength ever was, not the muscle, the not quitting. Then she smiled, that small, tired human smile, and she went back to her work. I think about that all the time. I think about the wall they took down, and the king who nodded, and the legend she lifted up off the floor with her own 2 hands. I think about how a whole academy, a whole golden age of an institution, got changed not by an army, but by one small dark-haired girl from a dying world who simply refused to believe that bigger meant better. People ask me sometimes what humans are really like, the ones who weren't there. They want a simple answer. I always tell them the same thing. I tell them it was never the punch. It was that she helped him up.